Today, we're very happy to welcome Robin Magnier from Ecole Polytechnique, who's going to present to us basically functional maps 101 to your research work. I think you defend your PhD thesis in 2 weeks?
No, 2 months.
Okay.
A bit more. I give my manuscript in 2 weeks. All right. So today I'll be talking about intrinsic matching with functional maps. So as Jean said, I'm a PhD student at Ecole Polytechnique, soon to be graduating, and don't ask what I'm doing after, I don't know. Like today, the goal is kind of to give you a generic overview of the different, like what exists, what is a field of functional map, what it is, and what the different methods are. I'm not gonna go into too much details because I know it can be like mostly a big issue with like vocabulary, like a lot of new vocabulary. So I'll just keep it like a broad overview of what we do and also what I've been doing, which is going to be here and there during the presentation. So the goal of functional maps, the field of functional map is just a subfield of shape matching. Most of you must be familiar with shape matching, I guess, but they are still presented quickly. So the objective of shape matching, if we have these two like nice shapes of prehistoric jaws, I think it comes from the Museum of Natural History in Paris. And the goal is, I'll just create M and N for the rest of the talk, is like given a point on one shape to like find what would be the corresponding point on the other one. So as you can see, there's some issues here also that like some T's are missing on the left, some T's, like there's not exactly the same amount of information on each shape, which makes it a very difficult problem in general. And but let's just say like hopefully if everything has a corresponding point, let's just try to find like these correspondences which are going to be embedded as like just a simple function from two surfaces. So that's like the general objective. So why do we need shape matching? So otherwise, usually to compare shapes. So I put like 2 examples, but even like the first one is way broader than it seems like. Like originally, shape matching is useful for computer graphics. And in computer graphics, we really like to transfer textures, high quality textures from like one shape to another because you design one shape and you design a texture for one shape, you want to transfer it to another one. It seems a bit like strange from outside, but like you can transfer more than texture here. You can transfer any signal. So I've had, for instance, a project where you had scans of cells and you want to transfer like fluorescence values, or you could have like just some specific points, some landmarks points you want to like transfer from one shape to another because you want to automatically compute measures like distances, or maybe you want like the radius at the center of the bone. So you would have to transfer something like maybe a line, maybe a whole texture, maybe any signal. So there's a lot of stuff you could transfer from one shape to another with the correspondences. So I just put it as signal transfer, but it's a generic way to compare two shapes or to compare stuff on two shapes. The other one, which might be maybe counterintuitive for some of you, is very useful for deformations. But I guess, like I know some people here work on deforming shapes without having to have shape correspondence. But one way, I guess it's just a matter of point of view, but you can see deforming one shape into another as if you have correspondences, then you can find like the best deformation with respect to some energy, or if you have a good deformation model, find the deformation which aligns with the correspondences as much as possible. So it's not necessary in order to get the deformation, but if you have like correspondences, you have the deformation. So but yeah, I'm not gonna dive into too many details about this.
No, what do you mean? You mean it's more general?
Yeah, not. It's a point of view. As a point of view, I find it like more general. It's like a general way of saying if I deform one shape into another, I get the correspondences because if 2 points are like another one, you get the correspondences. But the other way around, if you get the correspondences, you have some deformation without a deformation model, because you just have like corresponding points, but you don't have to like derive or model a specific deformation. But it's gonna come into a circle because good correspondences are usually come from a good deformation. So it's kind of circling arguments. So today's objective, as I said, is to provide an overview of functional map related methods. Most of what I'm gonna mention is like I've encoded in a package, small package I have on GitHub, big package maybe. There's not a lot of documentation yet. It's coming very, very soon, but there's an example notebook where you can go and you can like run some of the algorithm I send is just like a few lines and you can test it on some shapes. Hopefully you can give it a look at some point. So I'm just gonna like formulate the problem of shape matching slightly more formally. So given two arbitrary shapes, let's just say manifolds, with two sets of vertices, we will take a map T between the two sets of vertices, which produce good correspondence. So there's a few things to say here. First, good correspondence, it doesn't mean much. It could be like the correspondence that's natural because like we know on like two objects that are similar, what points should be corresponding to each other. In practice, you don't know this in advance, so it would be something like invertible map, no area distortion, it preserves distances, it comes from a good deformation, or a lot of things. Something else you can notice is that if you want to map from two sets of vertices on a discrete surface, it's just a combinatorial problem because we get 100 vertices on one shape, 1000 on the other one, and you just want like the index of the target for every point. So it is just a combinatorial problem, but a hard one. If you want to transfer texture, though, you might want to have something more specific. You don't want a vertex to go to another vertex, but a vertex to go on the surface. So it could be inside a triangle. So then the problem becomes having target on the face.
So when you say shapes, you mean it's just triangular meshes or more general?
It can be more general. I'm just going to focus on triangle meshes here. You could have it could be like you don't need to be have triangulation. You could have like squares or hexagonals or whatever. It just has to be like maybe not a volume could work. It could also go with discrete volume like tetrahedral meshes, but usually for scalability we will only work with like triangle or like just surfaces, not volumes. So functional maps is essentially like one approach to solve this problem without to solve a combinatorial problem. We don't want to solve this because it can be very, very hard. And it's very hard to guide the problem if you want like no area distortion, it's hard to find a good like combinatorial solution. And in a way, it's a kind of relaxation. There's two ways to see functional maps and the overall idea. The first idea is like we will we'll try to transfer functions from one shape to another functions or real valued functions. So like a coloring of a shape, we'll try to transfer it on another one. And we will linearly transport it. On the left, that's what I show. We have a small size matrix and it can transfer like the RGB color I put on one shape into the other one. And because every point has a unique RGB color on the left, well, you can find like the correspondences with this. Another way to see it, and this is maybe very not clear for now, but it will be hopefully at the end of this part, we try to linearly align something called the spectral embeddings of a shape. That is, every point will have an embedding, which is not like its x, y, z coordinate, but something else. And we will try to find a linear transformation, which is going to align the two. It could be seen a bit like aligning two shapes with a rotation, except we're moving the spectral coordinates and in a linear manner. It's not clear yet, but hopefully I'll explain more clearly. So let's just find functional map. So let's say that we'll start from this right now. We'll have two shapes. We have the map T, we have correspondences. So now if I take a function on the rightmost shape, like it's kind of a specific function, but I take a function, then I could like put the color on the leftmost shape just by, for every point on the left shape, I color it with the same color as its targets with respect to T. And you can just transfer back the function. For mathematicians, it's pretty easy. It's called the pullback operator. So it should be, we call it FT. It's just, it should be like, I guess, T star to be more consistent with a mathematical definition, but let's just work with FT for now. So it's just a pullback and we kind of did nothing. So it's just like, okay, that's nice, but we just transfer the function. It's pretty trivial, but there's one thing that you might already know is that FT is linear. So we will have a linear map between two functional spaces, which will make the whole what's follow way nicer. So the two main properties is that FT, the functional map, is linear and it contains exactly the same information as T under some assumptions, but let's just say at least on a discrete triangle surface with like a triangulated surface, if you express every function as just its value at every vertex, so it essentially is a hard basis where you have you can define continuous functions which take a value on the vertex and then decrease linearly to 0 to every nearby vertex. And if you have a simple representation of a function, then it's exactly the same like in a computer to encodes t and ft. So we really did nothing, like nothing was changed. So, okay, sorry. But we have a linear function between functional spaces. So we can, if we have a basis, a good basis, this becomes a function, okay, an infinite function because it's like infinite dimensional space. Or if we're on a surface with endpoints, it's like n-dimensional space, and n can be like 1 million. But maybe we can just find a better basis than the hat function to transfer, because we don't really care about like transferring random noise. We really want mostly like smooth functions, or we could care, but let's just say we don't care. And one good basis we could use to like describe any like the function we like is essentially like what we call the Laplace Beltrami eigenbasis. Is essentially the Fourier basis, but it can be generalized to any surface. So this basis is essentially the eigenvectors of the Laplacian as the Laplacian defined as on the shape. You can define a Laplacian on a curved surface. An easy way to see why it works, if you take like the 0-1 interval, you have the Laplacian, and you want you look for eigenvectors of the Laplacian, and you solve the eigenvalue problem, you will get, depending on your boundary conditions, you will get like the sine basis or the cosine basis. If you apply the same construction to the sphere, you can define it in a continuous manner, and you obtain the spherical harmonics. And if you do to a general surface, you obtain a similar kind of basis, with like on the left, you got examples of these functions which go from like low frequency to very high frequency. And if you take the whole basis, which is again n-dimensional, you can get every possible functions, but with increasing number of frequencies. So if I take the previous function before that I showed, g, you can just show it as like a linear combination of, I mean, it's just a basis. But you can do like for Fourier basis and just restrict the analysis to the first harmonics, because, okay, let's remove the high frequencies, let's remove the noise, let's just care about transferring this like smooth functions. We lose some information, but maybe not that much. Maybe we don't care that much. I don't have the presenter view, so I forgot what I put here. Oh yeah, so now we can like express this functional map in the basis. The basis is nice enough so that it's orthogonal. So to describe like a linear operator in an orthogonal basis is very easy. You just have to like project with the inner products. So this would be like the C and FT are essentially the same thing. If I take like the complete basis, like the infinite basis, let's say. But in practice, we're going to just reduce to the span of the first like k eigenvectors. So which will just be a k by k matrix. It should be an infinite matrix, but we're going to say it's a k by k. And k in practice, I just say it right now, we'll say it after, it's around like between 10 and maximum 200s, even if your shape have like 1 million vertices. Usually it's far from enough to actually get correspondences. So now our correspondences are, instead of having a combinatorial problem, we have a continuous matrix, a k by k matrix independently from the number of vertices. And it's a heavy relaxation of the problem. And we just did this by neglecting high frequencies in the functions. So it has some properties, let's just say some visual properties. Again, not going to go into too many details. You can see that it seems to have some like near diagonal structure. That's because the basis is you can add the same basis if you modify a shape isometrically. So if you rotate, translate, or move a shape in a way that doesn't change the distances between 2 points, distances like geodesic distances, you're going to have exactly the same eigenfunctions. Plus, the sign can change because you don't care. So you have sign flips. And if the shape changes a bit, you can hope, it's just nothing mathematical here, you can hope that you get like, it's just gonna like change a bit the eigenfunctions, and you can like compensate with something that's nearby. And that's why you can like kind of cut and just look at the first k by k matrix of this infinite matrix, because it's mostly zeros on what's left. At least on the bottom, it's mostly zeros that's left. So hopefully you don't lose that much information. You do lose. And something else that we're going to use after is that some constraints on the underlying map T can be expressed easily as just properties of this matrix. So like if your map is originally preserves the area, it doesn't like distort the area between the two shapes, it means that C is orthogonal. I mean the entire C, no, we just have a reduced C, but hopefully again it doesn't change too much. If T in isometry, C commutes with the Laplacian, there's this kind of easy formulation of kind of complex properties of the map, becomes like easy properties on a matrix. So all this was, we started from a map T, and we have this functional map started from like combinatorial solution, and we get a small matrix which embed correspondences. Now if we want to go the other way, I'm going to go quickly on this because just so you know it exists, and maybe
the property that you said between preserving area or asymmetry, is it because of the basis you choose? If you take another base, is it still true?
Kinda, yeah. Because it comes from the fact that if it's area preserving, you preserve the inner product. And this basis is made so that like inner product between two functions is just like the, so as function defined on the whole shape, it can be seen as just the inner product between the coefficients, but like standard inner product. So like the general inner product on the surface between two functions, it has like weights depending on the vertex areas and stuff. And because the basis comes from the Laplacian, it happens that the inner product between two functions is just the standard like Frobenius inner product between the coefficients in the basis. And this leads to the fact that if you preserve the inner product, you will say that it means that C is orthogonal, but it's not specific to the basis itself, but to any basis which satisfies this. So if you change the basis, you might have something else. It's not orthogonal, it would be like C transpose something C equal identity, because you would have to rewrite the inner products, but it's pretty similar. Oh, sorry. And so now if you want to go to the other way around, I'm going to go, as I said, quickly, because just you know it exists and whatever. Just each vertex, you can create an embedding, which essentially is the value of every function at this point. And you have k coefficients, and it happens to be a function. I'm not going to go into details again. Essentially, the function is the projection of the Dirac operator, or the Dirac operator. Let's just say the Dirac function, even if it's not true. It's just the production of the Dirac onto the basis. So the more you increase k, the more the circle will reduce. And if you use the full basis, like the n element of the basis, you just have a function which is 1 at the vertex and 0 everywhere else. So the approximation of the Dirac is like it's embedding. And because it's a function, you can transfer it with a functional map. So you can just like know to get like a point-to-point map. So you have a function on one shape, you can transfer it on the other shape, and you can find like which vertex on the other shape carries the closest function. I just say comparing because, yeah.
Can you
Yep. So
can you explain a bit more how you find this correspondence? It's not completely clear to me.
this?
So you embed each point x using this map.
Yeah. So
And then when you use this embedding, how do you?
So these embeddings are so it's like you have a function for every point. Now you can transfer for every point. You can transfer its function. If you have a functional map and you want the point, now you can transfer all of these functions onto the other shapes. So like C times EIM is every is the function of vertex I on shape M that you transfer on the other shape. Now you can compare this function to like every function, every point on the other shape has a function also, and you can compare them with like the L2 inner product or the L2 norm. And then you can have, and comparing, you can take nearest neighbor, Or you could say, if you want something, like I said, you want a vertex to lie in a triangle, you can say that, the function inside the triangle is a weighted combination. And this becomes like point to triangle projection, but in high dimensional space. Don't worry, there's code which does this for you.
Capital K.
Capital K means I truncated the basis to K. And so depending on the size of the functional map, the functional map is K by K. So you can like kind of see, even if it's not up, it doesn't have to be, but the higher the K, like the more precise you become. And even on the correspondences that you get eventually.
So maybe Oliver, because I know that when you come from medical imaging and you're not used to that, the first time it's maybe a bit confusing, but I think the algorithm that everyone understands here is affine registration, right? So like for each point you have X, Y, Z coordinates, you apply an affine like a 3x3 matrix, and you say, okay, it maps the other point, and then you apply nearest neighbor to say, okay, this point goes there. And basically here, what you're saying is that instead of using the X, Y, Z features on each point, you use K features, which are psi K M, like the psi K of Xi, and then the point is what happens.
It's just going to be like slightly visual, just on the last point, is exactly what you said, is if I write it in a very compact way, so I can write, so the embedding for every point is K dimensional, and I got n point, so I could put like a big n times K matrix of all the embeddings on one shape, and n times K all the embeddings on the other shapes. And the formula is like I compare linear transformation of the first embedding and the second embedding. I just have like nearest neighbor between the rows of this and between the rows of this. So it's very close to, affine or just rotation or whatever, except the embedding is not XYZ, it's just a spectral, what we call the spectral embedding.
Because I think, what we've seen over the last year is that usually in medical imaging, we stay in a low dimensional feature space and we do nonlinear deformations. And here it's like a dual perspective where you do simple affine transforms in a high dimensional feature space.
Yeah.
In the M and N are similar, so basically cis diagonal.
Yeah, it's like identity and plus or minus one, because like the eigenvectors are not defined up to the sign, but yeah, exactly. So like the C just just align the signs, but that's all. So I mean, all this is nice. So small recap: functional maps, K by K matrices. You can get pointwise correspondences if you get a functional map, but whatever the case, you need to start with something, and we don't have this. We neither have a functional map as an entry or pointwise map as an entry. If you just have two shapes, like what can we do? And that's going to be kind of the issue. But now we have a simpler thing of like we can just look for a matrix, a continuous K by K matrix, instead of looking for a combinatorial problem. We will have to keep some structure because not every matrix can be seen as, it's a map and that you transform into a functional map. Like the space is way bigger, the space of K by K matrix is way bigger. But still, it's easier to navigate in a continuous space. So now I'll just show some quick overview of like the general method that exists. Essentially, there's two types of methods. Let's just not go too quickly forward. So originally, the basic way to compute functional maps was, I get, again, it's a lot of assumption, but, I get this function. We don't have like landmarks. We just say, we have this two function which should be corresponding of, I don't know, it's like I had some stuff with, you have fluorescence on one shape and it has to be the same on the second one. So you have some information. And so you want the functional map to transfer the functions in the same way. It looks like a stupid assumption to have this, I know. And you can just try to solve like a linear system of like, transferring these functions. And this is just some Laplacian commutativity. It's just some regularization. I'm not going to go into details into this. And this was the original pipeline, which was presented like with the functional maps themselves. It has been extended since then with like additional regularizer and stuff. But the overall idea is like if you got descriptors, or what we call descriptor functions, or just function that should be the same on the two shapes, could be like curvature maybe, or I don't know. Then you can just solve some kind of linear system to resolve this. The thing is how you get this function. So again, there was back in like 10 years ago, there was a lot of automatic descriptors. So trying to compute functions on shapes, which if the shapes are similar, should be the same. You could hope that, for instance, curvature could be something. And there's something like heat canal signature, wave canal signature, which have been derived, like again, 2009, 2011. This is an example of some of the functions which are like heat canal signature is kind of, it defines, it's easier to understand, it defines how fast heat will like spread from one point. Like if you wait for like half a second, how much heat will this point have as lost? And it reacts to curvature actually. So in a way, you kind of have multi-scale curvature. Wave canal signature is slightly harder.
And so, for instance, here, why do you have heat on like the four paws of the cat?
So
I would have expected that for each thing you would have one.
Sorry.
And then the radius around it.
So like for every point, you expect that, you start with just heat at this point, you wait for like half a second, and how much heat remains at your own point. Not just like the function. And you do this for every point at the same time, which is what this is not really diffusing heat here. It's like more like the signature of a point compared to heat. It's kind of, if you have nothing, if you have no information, that's kind of not the best, but that's something you hope will work. And it has had some success, except it has some issues. You can see on the left. I mean, okay, it distinguishes somehow front and back, but left and right are exactly the same. It doesn't care. It cannot distinguish left and right because if you're purely symmetric, heat diffuses the same on my left hand and my right hand.
So, but there's no reference point here? So it's not a...
No.
Okay, so it's not a one diffusion, it's a signature?
Yeah.
Completely diffusion?
Yeah.
If you throw random motion from one point, you basically get the heating time of the unit ball. So it's the time you need to go far away from your point. So when you're stuck on the end of the tips, you stay here, so it's red. But
and everywhere else,
everywhere else you can go far away.
Essentially, and you have like, this is one of the functions, and then depending on the time parameter, you can get like 100 functions. You have 100 functions that you hope on average should be roughly the same between, it's a lot of assumption again, but should be roughly the same between two shapes. But I kind of, I don't have the functional map, so instead I take, I have this function as an input, which is kind of a trick. Maybe something more modern is, to use AI and to take shapes as inputs. And you take a shape and you have a network which produces a function which should be the same for everyone. So, I have a function which highlights the hands. For every shape of human shape I get, it highlights the right hands. A second function which highlights the leftmost hands. Here, diffusion.net is one example of a network that takes a shape as an input and outputs a feature. It doesn't take the two shapes as an input. It just processes in parallel, doesn't do like cross information. And then you have your features, and then you can put your linear solver system, and because it's you can backpropagate through it with torch. Even if it's not very stable, you can. And there's been like multiple slight extension which I'm not going to describe. And then you obtain a functional map, and I mean, again, maybe it's gonna invert left and right. You can hope that it preserves area, it preserves a lot of things, but sometimes you might have some issues still. But it's right now the state of the art of what you can do if you have two random shapes and you want to just match them, and you have literally no information. And if you have enough shapes, you can hope that you train a neural network and it's going to be able to work right away. There's a few issues with this. The first one is the input. What do you use as an input? Usually it's XYZ, or it's a previous signature even, which is a bit strange. Or if you have an existing signal, you can use this, or you can use just once everywhere and hope that the network will learn something. It's not very stable, and in practice, features extractors don't generalize well. So we don't have the thing of, if you do images, you can just take, I have on torch, I have this network pre-trained on something, and I can like throw it at my problem, and it's gonna generate something meaningful. Here, it's not the case. You have to like retrain from scratch everything on your data. You cannot take something that exists and it's gonna work right away without having to have if you don't have a GPU, essentially, you cannot do anything. So you can, but it's
sensitive.
Essentially, sometimes it works better, sometimes it works worse. It's like a very dense area of research right now of trying to like being able to fine tune, having something that you just fine tune. Right now, it doesn't. As far as I know, it doesn't work, and it's very difficult to make it work compared to images.
If I give you two shapes, very small data, what's the baseline we should use?
It depends on like if you just have two shapes,
Yeah.
then you cannot use this. You need to use either the previous one or what I'm going to present after. If you have literally zero info,
Or small data.
yeah.
Small data. I cannot use it.
This now, if you have zero info, you have to use the previous one. If you have like something like 50 shapes at least, then you can throw it at it because it's trained in a pairwise manner. So what counts is the amount of pairs of shape you have, which grows like as a square of the number of shapes. So with 50 shapes, it can be okay because it has very few numbers of parameters. But if you have like 10 shapes, no, I don't think it's gonna work. So that's like, I mean, the papers I'm showing here are like from 1 or 2 years ago. So it's moving forward. I don't know where it will end in. Maybe in 1 year, you could have something that you can just throw at it. And that kind of what you can do if you have no information. There's another field of research, which is what we call like refining maps. Oh, sorry. Okay, let's not read everything at first, but so if you have a functional map or correspondences which are blurry, you can refine them. I guess you have people who do shape matching have some way of doing this. Or if you have, you can imagine if you have like shapes which are roughly aligned, or you can do ICP. So you have some guess of, oh, they're roughly aligned, and then if I do some iterative alignments, I'm gonna end up at the right position. I'm gonna align the shapes, but you need to have some initialization, and we have exactly the same thing, and kind of literally the same thing is the zoom out algorithm of you have either a rough functional map from the previous pipeline, or you have a rough correspondences because you have landmarks, or because your shapes are almost aligned, so you have some like poor correspondence, but you still have correspondence. You can transform like a pointwise map into a functional map into a pointwise map, and do this in circle, literally like iterative closest points. Except every time you compute a functional map, you increase its size. So yeah, you increase the capacity of the map, and it's just, it has been like, I think, the best performing algorithm in functional map. If you have one thing you need to remember is this, you can just, it's the simplest algorithm ever.
You start by matching the low frequency function, basically.
You can have any, if you have like, yeah, essentially yes, but like if you have no info originally, you try to matching the low frequency, it can work. It's usually better if you have, oh, my shape are almost aligned, so I have some like very blurry correspondence where I have like 1 or 2 landmarks, and I start from this. That's where it usually shines. There also been some works, I'm not going to talk about it here, but if you start for something random and you hope to get like the best possible map with this kind of algorithm.
You need a decent first initial guess.
Decent is like, yeah, not even decent, just something that does not like random things. And it's like, yeah, 5 lines of code, and it's very fast, and it's been shown to favor like isometric maps. The way it's, because the way it's been shown to favor isometric maps, it's important for what follows next even. You can show that this iterative algorithm is actually the relaxation of a problem, of an energy on the functional map. So you want the functional map to be an isometric, come from an isometric map. So it's just a function of an energy on the functional map. Then you can relax the problem and solve it with this like iterative ICP-like algorithm. And using this, there's been some like other work which extends zoom out by adding other energies. So you start on the left, zoom out starts from an energy on C, it relaxes, and then it's solved iteratively. Now there's another paper which just added new energies on the leftmost side. Like your energy on C was like, oh, I want the, let's just say it was, oh, I want C to be orthogonal, so C transpose C minus identity. You want to minimize this, and then you relax by transforming one of the C into a pointwise map, and you just solve. But what's important is essentially you have this like a cycling loop, and you can just change the energies that you use. And there's been like energies for like landmark preservation, or you want your map to preserve angles or to preserve stuff like this. For instance, I have a toy example where they want to preserve a landmark. So they want to match two spheres, and so on the very left you got one landmark, and on the second column you get the second landmark, which is placed at different spaces. And because you have this, you have a very good guidance. You can just start from a random initialization and do this iterative conversion, which is very slightly modified to take into account this this extra term. And in every case, you're gonna converge to a decent map. But that's on a sphere, but you can work with more complex data. It's maybe not very clear. I say that. Yeah. So instead of having landmarks, I transform it into a function because that's the only thing we can use. So on the left, it's function, but you can see that it comes from a specific landmark. And then let's just say that k is the iteration number, because the iteration number and the size of the functional map is the same. But so iteration 1, you start from something random. Then iteration 3, 5, 25, 50. So you try to transfer.
Okay, so maybe what I understand is that in the input descriptor, basically you say you have 3 landmarks.
No, 1 landmark on each. So this is 3 different experiments on 3 on 3 shapes and 3 results every time. And every time you start from a random pointwise map.
Okay, but because if you match 2 spheres and you only have 1 landmarks, you have
there's no the big issue of shape matching is usually you don't have, even if you have some landmarks. If you have 1 landmarks, everything can work as long as it's smooth. Everything could work because there's this 1 degree of freedom essentially. Or 2, 1.
What should we compare?
You should compare. So essentially, So this texture here has been rotated so that this point faces now here, here, or here, but without rotating the sphere itself. It just rotates the texture. So the shape has not been touched ever. The geometry of the shape has not moved. It's just the functions on top of the shape have moved, which is so it's different from a deformation. In a way, it can be seen as a deformation, but we never actually deform.
F and G are deduced from source and target?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was mapping to itself. That was an issue. So yeah, but yeah, it was source and target. Just
But you're happy when TI looks like the source?
You're happy when what was facing here
Yes.
is now facing here on the target. So yeah, sorry, it's not very clear. I did not realize it was that unclear. I took the image from the paper and then
And sorry. So from so you have ideally a source and target.
Yeah.
You deduce some descriptors like F1 and G1. And
Yeah.
you want to find the best deformation.
not the
CK. You want to find CK, transform your descriptor F into your descriptor G.
Yeah, essentially. But using this,
But C is like this big matrix.
Yeah, and so the function can be either it's a value at every point or it's coefficient in the basis. And if you it's k, you can project in the basis and it becomes k coefficients. So a function is a k coefficient, so you can multiply it by the k by k matrix. And that's how you transfer a function. And then you can plot it back to pointwise values just for visualization purposes.
Okay.
And do you have a convergence results for this?
No.
And do you know if it does? I mean, what's your opinion on that? Do you think you can prove something or?
Possibly, honestly. Yeah, I guess so.
I think it's hard. So I think a lot of this, even these theorems that these functions are in area preserving if they commute with, if they sort of preserve these things.
Yeah,
all
but
these theorems only work if your shapes are in dense correspondence. All these proofs rely on that your shapes have the same triangulation. In the discrete sense, in a continuous sense, they work because they come from some standard results from harmonic analysis, like harmonic analysis of this Laplace-Beltrami. But in the discrete sense, I think the picture is very complicated right now.
Yeah, it's mostly approximates. Every property that I say of it favors isometric maps is not very true, because you can show that the first energy in the continuous sense, if your shapes are in dense correspondence, can leads to this. But if you have a discrete shape on a truncated basis, this is not very true. So all you can show is that if you solve the energy in a continuous manner, you usually get stuck in a very bad local minima because it's a quadratic energy usually. But if you do this iterative thing, it works well. So what you can guess is that if you compare to ICP, you have a rotation, which is already like a very structured matrix. But if we could use any 3x3 matrix, there's going to be an issue of everything could collapse. And by doing this back and forth projection, you kind of take the matrix back to something that's reasonable and then optimize a bit and take it back to something reasonable. And it's kind of a safety net to avoid like the map to collapse. I forgot what's my next slide.
So what I'm not sure about is
Yeah.
like when you go back to the correspondence, how do you use that to help like the functional map generation? You use it as a
Because you have an energy which is it depends on the pointwise map and on the functional map. So if you have a functional map, then you just have an energy on the pointwise map and it's just like nearest neighbor query or something like very similar. And if you have the pointwise map, then it's like linear system or something very similar on the other way around. It's just you have like two variables, and when you just optimize one by one.
when you have like a pointwise correspondence, what do you do?
When you have a pointwise correspondence, you optimize for C. Or you don't really optimize, I do an approximated thing of so just do the exact formula to compute a functional map from a pointwise map.
Okay.
So, but in theory, you could also optimize for the functional map, except it doesn't work as well. So it's even an extra step of approximation, which is
It makes it sharp again.
yeah. The point is like you want the functional map to remain sharp and not collapse to like 0, because 0 would usually be a very good solution for every energy. So and there's Okay, this is like a lot of things, but in practice, the code makes it so you usually don't have to care about anything. Just have to say, oh, I want like this energy is an energy, and it's gonna solve it for you. So in the documentation, no. But even if you have this, if you have very dissimilar shapes, I'm sorry, it's gonna be very ugly images, but happens. You're gonna have discontinuous patches that happen somewhere, and you don't know why. Honestly, we don't know why. We never like investigated too much. In this like iterative process, at some point, like some bad stuff pops up, and it's hard to understand why. Usually here because the shape doesn't have a very good triangulation, but still it should be decent. So sometimes it fails when the shapes are very dissimilar. So approximation don't hold, obviously. Exactly why? I mean, we did not investigate too much of this. But we extended the previous stuff in a very simple manner. Like we started from a simple energy, and we can say, oh, but we can directly add something with a pointwise map at the beginning and say, oh, but we also want like some smooth. We want the correspondence to produce like roughly smooth correspondences, and then it just modifies because you relax also this as an extra variable. I'm not going to go into details. And you had an extra variable, and so you had an extra term, but you keep the same structure, except you added some energies which can be expressed in the spatial domain. It's a bit counterintuitive because the smoothness is somewhat sometimes stuff which are high frequencies, something we removed when we're doing functional map, and now we're putting it back in the pipeline because we it was actually useful to have them sometimes. And this is closer to, in practice, the smoothness energy kind of checks like the deformations on one shape into another. So kind of going back into computing the deformation, even if originally we did not need the deformation. But yeah, I'm not going to go into details because this maybe can be a bit painful. And essentially, you can like have like more smooth correspondences, which are here shown by just like I said at the beginning, like transferring the RGB colors.
If I can ask you
yeah.
a question, so because here, you spend a lot of time about basically the way you add features progressively during the optimization, about the smoothness regularization also that you use. But when you have two shapes, you also need a kind of data attachment term that tells you who should go where. And in practice, what do you use? Like I understand that usually in the examples you have a few landmarks.
It's a bit like just in practice, if you do something, it's can say it as just ICP. If you start from something decent, it's gonna give something good. In practice, you can even start from something like random in terms of matrix, a small 2x2 matrix, which is a small functional map which does almost nothing, and you still get something decent.
So underlying basically your loss function, it's always ICP, iterative closest point, and
Yeah, it's very close. It's very, very close to ICP, except like the matrix is not a rotation; it can be any matrix. So, but
yes. No.
so the data attachment paired is when you compute the pointwise map in the ICP. It's kind of a data attachment, and it's the same thing here. It's the biggest guidance is this. And here we have smoothness. So okay, this can be useful, especially if you. Typically, I had a project where we were analyzing like pair vertex displacement from one shape to another. And if you have one discontinuous patch, it creates a huge outlier or patches of outliers. And this can sometimes you would rather get a map that's less precise but that's smooth than a map that's very precise almost everywhere but which has some outliers depending on your downstream tasks. I say this because if you add smoothness, usually you lose some like area preservation or some good local properties at the cost of having that's the cost to get nice and smooth maps. But this is just way more complex in the algorithm, so I'm not gonna go into details. So in this last part, so I'm still 15 minutes left, so it's fine. I'm gonna talk about the latest work I did. Everything seems fine because we're working with k-by-k matrices. In practice, it's not that easy. There's still some heavy dependency on the number of points, and also k is small. It's 100, whatever the number of points in the shape. But when you do like nearest neighbor queries is on 1 million point with dimension 150, it's not very fun. So in that's why I kind of most of the results were on the toy object or like handmade object, like computer graphic stuff, and not on real data. So let's come back to the real data for some time, because like this data is particularly dense, and there's a question of how we can still process this. So big problem if for functional maps are pre-processing because we have to compute this basis, and this can be very slow because it's a sparse problem, n times n problem, and I guess it's something like 500,000 points or something like this. And you have a lot of high-dimensional nearest neighbor queries, this becomes a huge mess. The solutions usually are either you do remeshing, but if you remesh how you do upsample, it's not so easy, although now that Louis has a good... So everything I show here, I'm wondering if I use the code from Louis, I could not get roughly the same thing because it's a very similar idea. Or you could use some sampling and some approximations, which have literally like no guarantees, and sometimes they fail, sometimes they don't. It's very dependent on your sampling itself. And if you want a good sample on a dense surface, then you also have to compute stuff which is slow to compute. So if the sampling part is slow, then you kind of lose the whole interest of having a sampling. So the overall idea was that first, let's focus on the preprocessing and the basis. So the basis is made of very smooth functions. We don't care about the details of the shape. It ignores the shape details, especially the low frequency, which is the only one we use. So the idea that maybe we could like write this function as just sum of bigger blobs rather than just individual values. It's just a very simple idea. And the overall algorithm, which was derived in 2018, was, okay, well, I have my shape with a lot of points. I can just sample p-point on the surface in a fast way, like Poisson disk sampling, or even random, like whatever. You just have a fast sampling, which is not guaranteed to be like evenly spaced. It's okay. And then for every point, you just create this kind of basis function, which maybe could be, maybe we could discuss that after. You generate some basis functions which are centered on this. And it's like a very local function, it's very natural. It's kind of like if the shape is remeshed, except the shape is not remeshed. You can compute this like rather fast if you do some local digital, to be honest. It's like faster than you would expect, I guess. And you have to ensure partition on the unity of the overlap. This is just for sanitary reason on some derivation after. And then you can just look for the eigenfunctions are just, instead of being like values at every vertex, they're just a sum of this. Essentially just remeshing without remeshing. And so what this does, okay, sorry. Is we have a new, we will have a new functional space, which is not the space of the Laplacian and stuff, but whatever. And this gets a new functional map because it's a new functional space. But every derivation still holds. Maybe not all the properties of orthogonality, although in this case it does, but you can still define most of the things because all the definitions were kind of basis agnostics. But what we can also do is say that, oh, the value at a sample before and after, like the interpolation, because essentially you're doing interpolation by the basis, by the local function I defined. You could hope that both are the same. So you could approximate the coefficients in this. These coefficients alpha here, you can identify them to the value eventually at the point. I guess it's something maybe very known in like interpolation or like candle density estimation. There's also things about that. And this, you approximate the values, and this will lead to approximating the functional map. Approximate the functional map. I'm not gonna go into details because this is very, very painful. Like it's a lot of like definitions which are very similar things which are very similar one to another. But this approximate functional map essentially it relies on the fact that, oh, I have values on the samples. If I transfer them to the other shape, and then I like interpolate to get to values at every point, then at the samples, it's the same thing if I first interpolate and then transfer. I think it's something that must be very known somewhere. I just didn't look too far, so I just derived myself the bounds on the error of the approximation, and in like we minimized this like not fully minimized, but we pushed like towards minimizing this upper bound on the approximation, which then makes an approximate functional map a good approximation of the functional map. And the difference, I'm not going to go into the. I'm sorry I didn't write all the details on why it's actually like very scalable, because it would have been like, I think 15 minutes of definitions. What you can see eventually is that by approximating the functional spaces, you can work exactly as if you had a remeshed shape without ever touching the surface itself. You just touch like, oh, how you define your function, the span of your like the basis on which your function are defined, but you never move the surface. You still get all the details of the original shape. And it's useful because eventually you can get subsample accuracy and even like sub-triangle. Okay, it's another pair of shapes, sorry. You can get like sub-triangle accuracy even if you did not even have like all the vertices. So I can transfer a texture, and the texture is not transfer like vertex to vertex. Like every point goes somewhere inside a triangle. So okay, the straight line are not perfectly straight, but it's still way better than if I had like a pair vertex map. So so this approximation allowed me to still get the details on the shape because I did not have to remesh ever. And so that was slightly unexpected, to be honest, but we were very happy of being able to have this. And now the standard algorithm, like the zoom out, if you zoom out with this new approximate functional map on a 500,000 shape, it takes like a few seconds. And before it would have taken maybe something like 30 minutes on CPU. Then you can port stuff to GPU, but I did not because I'm lazy. Is that right? I think it's all. And just before 1 hour.
On the last matching, how many triangles there were approximately?
I don't know. Usually for this paper, everything was more like few hundred thousands. I never went to 1 million, but it was always like 200,000-300,000.
It takes a few seconds.
Yeah, then to get the final like vertex to triangle, it was a bit slower because my code is very ugly, but yeah.
So you don't need to care about, let's say that between 4 points, there's some part detected.
Yeah.
It's captured by the local function of the 4.
I think what's happening is because everything is interpolated, because maybe, I'm guessing maybe if you just had exact correspondence between the samples, just by ensuring that the interpolation is consistent, you might have some sub-sample accuracy. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. So you're saying, oh, I'm at this distance of these three vertices, and these three are put here. Then I just have to be at the same. Yeah, there's only one way to be at the same distance, roughly. And I think that's what's happening. I'm guessing the details are still ignored in a way, but you can by just knowing the distance to every other point, you end up at the. I mean,
I guess it depends also on the k, the number function that you.
Yes, because even if you had a complete shape, depending on the k, you cannot have this with k equal to 10, but with k equal to 100, you can have this. It's not. You don't have to have very high dimensions.
So I was not able to understand the magic.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of magic. Cycle consistency was a keyword.
Yeah.
Was it? Or not?
Yeah. I don't know if it's exactly cycle consistency, but yeah, it's these two paths lead to the same thing. I guess it's cycle consistency.
Okay. Any other ingredient?
Essentially, the other ingredient is that it all comes from the fact that here I tell very quickly that you enforce partition of unity. Because everything would work very well if all these local bases looked like this, but in practice with partition of unity, let's say the center can shift somewhere else, and so we kind of have an algorithm which for every vertex at roughly no cost you have a different radius, let's say, and you modify the radius without ever recomputing anything. Because you start with something that's too big, so you can reduce things. You don't need to recompute values. You have already everything. So that was I guess the secret ingredient is this one. And so one sample is not really influenced by its neighbors. That's kind of the whole point. So the goal was to, one way to see this is if we could triangulate on this sample, we would want a function that's 1 on a sample and 0 everywhere else. And that's kind of what we want here, except you cannot exactly get it because, maybe we can, but I didn't look too much.
So usually the GCP converge in few iterations.
Yeah. Here, usually I use I go from k equal something 10 or 20 to 100, and I increase by size 5, so roughly 15 iterations. So usually it's the basic.
More than matrix 100.
Usually it's not necessarily. Yeah, no. Usually 200 is really the maximum I've been to. Yeah, I never use more than this. But usually 100, 120 maybe, I don't know. But it starts to be useless at some point. 100 is already, usually you keep on increasing because you want to improve the results, but you could have stopped increasing. The problem does not come from the algorithm, but more from the initialization or something. So at some point, increasing the number of values doesn't change anything because you already distinguished every point.
So what are the perspective of, so in which direction should we go for improve the results? So what are the challenges here?
I guess the challenges are mostly I think this is not working decently. The thing is, the current way now, this acts as a very good regularization if you want to compute correspondence. So you could have correspondence and say, oh, there's also if I have some correspondence, I transform it into a functional map. I have some stuff I can do, and I can use this as a prior of say, oh, it has to have some good structure. I have this correspondence, but if I transform them into a functional map and there's been, if this functional map has to be near orthogonal, and it means my correspondence are good. So it's a kind of it's used in shape matching with deep learning. You compute this functional map on the sides just to have a good loss of thing. we have some knowledge of what's doable, or you can compute this, refine with any of this algorithm, and you say, oh, that's where you should end. Originally, you should already have been at the result of this algorithm. So I guess it's maybe the more popular way of doing things now. Now that also how we can merge this with, because this is purely it never uses, except the small thing on smoothness, it never uses the coordinates, which is not the best thing, I guess, because they're very natural. It's hard to judge if correspondences are good with only a functional map, because all you know is area preservation and things, but you could have like flipping and reversing. And usually a good way is to say, oh, I want this correspondences to come from a good deformation, which is something we avoided at the beginning, but I think merging the two is something that's pretty hard. Yeah.
Maybe if I can ask you. So my understanding is that, you know, because you and the community have been motivated by computer graphics application, you know, you've put a lot of brain juice into, you know, making very crisp sub-pixel matching, like with a lot of focus on precision, but not really investigated issues of robustness, right?
No.
So especially to topological artifacts, etc. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm right, it's still very much an open problem to match shapes like which do not have the same topology, like human pose, whereas the people.
No, but that's yeah. There's like only very recently it's been applied to something else than just basic data. Usually it was really restricted to very simple shapes of usually human shapes, and I mean the zoom out algorithm is like 4 years old or 3 years old, but this is like the first time it actually starts to work very well on like real data from other fields. So now there's still like the smoothness paper were influenced by applying on like real data, and I had like huge outliers, which were not really a problem in terms of benchmarks, because the benchmarks are rather simple compared to what real data has. And yeah, it's kind of the novel challenge is making it work on real data, so scaling and smoothness.
So ask you like on the mandible that you showed us, okay, you don't have even the same numbers of teeth.
Yeah.
So obviously there's going to be a problem, but could you tell us maybe at least the teeth which are there, are they at least well matched together or not? Because, you know, when you show, is it purely a low frequency matching?
I forgot about this, but yeah, partial matching when you have missing parts is the biggest open problem in the community. And even worse if you have shapes where if I have one shape and a second shape where half of it I can match and half I can't, this is even worse. It's even easier if you have entirely everything that's happened on the second shape can be matched and the rest is just missing. This is slightly easier than if you have like a sub part that you can match of. You have some like monster and you have a human hand. Finding that there's a human hand and matching it is hard unless it's like 90% of the shape is matchable. So on the mandibles, it's still gonna work decently because there's a small amount of like differences. So at this point, there's gonna be some strange stuff, maybe some collapse, but if I remember when I ran the algorithm, it was like decent. But if there's more differences, then it's really a challenge. And there's hope that if you have good features, so then it's like mostly the area of learning on shapes and having good descriptors. And the biggest issue is that you don't have like good feature extractors that are like generalizable that you can just use out of the box. And right now it's maybe the biggest issue to be able to have stuff on small collections, because then you have to walk around with like new algorithm and new like initialization and finding something that's not a network to work with your 5 shapes that you have. And right now it's like the biggest issue. I guess it is the biggest issue. And partiality is awful. You need to adapt stuff if you want partial shapes. There's not a lot of differences, but there's differences because I'm not going into details because the basis, if I take my shape, I can say this, if I take my shape and like of me and I cut myself in half, then like the basis functions on the half shape have like corresponding function on the full shape, like one-to-one correspondence. It's actually interesting.
And you could not transfer the tricks that work for like rigid pose estimation to the setting? Because, you know, I think for me,
Yeah,
the one setting in 3D shape registration where people can get away with missing data is when they reconstruct 3D objects from multiple views. So obviously, you know, with sparse HCP, you know, obviously it works because they have a very rigid model. But here, you know, we zoom out because you start from basic registration and then you add more and more complexity. I don't know if that's something that's idiomatic in your community. People tried it, it doesn't work.
The problem with missing data is usually if you cannot use a square matrix for like functional map, you have to have a rectangular. And because of this, well, I'm not going into details, but yeah, I need a rectangular one. And then what like ratio of between length and width, like finding this is already a challenge, and then running the algorithm is another one, and then initialization is a third one. But there's been, if you just want a square matrix, there's been a good fun algorithm when you start randomly, you create a tree of possibility and you just go forwards. And it has not been used because it's on MATLAB. I'm 100% sure that's why. So I'm trying to record it in Python. It's not too hard. Hopefully, and then you can get something without any information. At least that's my hope.
And about the zoom out algorithm. So for example, the last experiment you showed was from the zoom out.
Yeah, it's just zoom out on. I mean, the shape were almost rigid lines, so I start for something that's not too bad.
Okay, but so my question is, so you have this initialization with a few landmarks only, and then
usually that's what we use.
And then you process. So all the information of the correspondence mainly is given by what?
Initialization.
No, but I mean all the fine details of the correspondences.
On here?
Yeah.
Or
example,
generally?
Why do the small? Why does it work? So.
My guess is if it works well on the samples, and then here, like you could I'm pretty sure you could define any point on the surface anywhere as just like the list of the distances to all the samples. And you could find like what would be this point on the other, and just by matching the samples, I think you could match the whole shape. It would be very ugly, but I think it would work.
So okay, so
that's why the details are here.
You're saying that it matches the map of distances from mostly, or
it matches the sample, but then by the basis I chose here, it's pure interpolation. I think in between is just interpolation between all the samples.
Okay.
But it's a bit strange.
But because you have this eigen function decomposition, so could we say that actually it matches the eigen maps, eigen functions? Essentially,
another way to say the functional map is it takes an eigenfunction, it transfers it, and it tries to reproduce the same eigenfunction with the other eigenfunctions. So if you have exactly the same, then it's easy. You just have like the one somewhere, and else it tries to reconstruct it with the other ones. So it tries to, all a functional map does is take these first k functions and try to mimic them on the other shape. That's like a last,
And so what about lambda research, which replace this very simple alignment in feature space with more complicated models in feature space?
I didn't see. There was something with only orthogonal matrix on the feature space instead of having any matrix. And usually it was too harsh of a constraint, but I haven't seen much on anything else than this. Because they could have, that's actually a good idea.